on the ABC Listen app, your smart speaker, and on AM radio.
This is ABC Radio Melbourne and Victoria.
With Brigitte Duclos.
Have you ever received an inheritance and was it complicated? 1300 222 774 is our number. I ask this because there's a new trend when it comes to distributing family inheritances, with firstborn females in the families now becoming the beneficiaries of the family wealth as opposed to men. This is definitely a pivot from former days when the firstborn women tended to be overlooked, like probably in the case of the Murdochs. To explain all this, I'm joined by Rob from Partners Wealth Group. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about the change. The olden days, it felt like often if you were firstborn and you were a woman, you were overlooked for it to go to the male.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a big change in that, with around 65% of females now being number one front runner to receive that wealth. I think things have changed a lot around women being more educated in the fact that, and being more, empowered to look after their own wealth, and that's probably been seen by the parents, but also obviously statistically they are likely to outlive the male counterparts, and really I think it's further than that. It's the fact that I think the families probably look at the eldest female as well as having a bit more understanding of the family values and possibly the dynamic relationships within a family as well.
Okay, so that all makes sense to me. Why were women overlooked for so long?
Well, I think it goes back to even, you go back to the 1970s and you saw you couldn't even open up a bank account if you're a female without having a male counterpart, which is unheard of in today's age. So I think a lot of that has filtered through now, and we're seeing parents, when they're making that decision of who to distribute their wealth via an estate plan, sort of seeing through that old way of doing things.
What used to happen in the case where there were 3 daughters, say, and no sons with the inheritance?
Well, I think under that case, it probably did then go to the firstborn female. That was that's generally been the way that it's gone in the past. But as you said before, the Murdochs is an interesting case there where we're probably not going to see that. But that's a little bit more complicated with business interests and the like there as well. Yeah.
Okay. Inheritances can cause feuds between families. I've seen it with friends of mine, which is absolutely awful. They were very close, the siblings, and now there's been a massive falling out. What can you do as the person leaving your money? What can you do to avoid that?
I think it's around having that open conversation with the family early. So before you've even gone and generally we do encourage people to get an estate plan. So an estate plan is not just a will. An estate plan covers all parts of your wealth. So whether that be your home, investments that you might have, businesses, and your superannuation. A will in itself does not distribute all of the assets. So a will only deals with your family home generally and some other assets that are held personally. If you've got something like superannuation, generally you'll need to connect that to your will, and the way you can do that's via an estate plan and items like a binding death benefit nomination.
Okay, so this is a much bigger plan that looks after every part of whatever assets you do have. Yeah,
and I think one common thing that people, when they're making, say, a will kit will, if they put assets in there that generally are not dealt with, that can mean that will's actually not valid. So there's a lot of learnings that come from that. And as you said, that's where disputes come about, where maybe in a will being completed or an estate plan being done, not being done by a specialist, and then that opens it up to obviously being challenged.
I read an article in the paper on the weekend about a daughter whose father had died, the mother remarried, so the stepfather ended up taking all the money. Does that happen a little bit?
It does. Again, that just comes down to a lack of planning. So if that's going to be the case, sitting down with whoever it might be to start with, an accountant or an advisor, that then will obviously refer you on to an estate planning specialist to understand where you want that money to flow. I think that's the first conversation you've got to have. Just sort of thinking that, all right, it's just going to go between the 4 of your children and my will's simple. I hear that all the time. Everybody's situation's complex. It's never simple. So getting that planning first is really, I guess, that second step. You've got to have that conversation with your family and say, this is where I think we want things to lay. And that's probably the hardest thing that everybody avoids. They always avoid that conversation with the family, and then that results in a fight later on when there's no one there to talk about.
I'm one of those people. My sister, I've got two sisters, and my mother wants us to put stickers behind things we want, and my sisters have happily done that. I'm really struggling with it because I just can't bear the thought, which is immature, I know, but I can't bear the thought of having that conversation. So that's silly. That I'm an example of what you're talking about.
Well, it just means you're going to have a conversation without your mother there at that point in time, and everyone might have a different view at that point in time as well. So it makes that conversation a little bit harder, especially if your siblings are not that close.
Well, she has mucked up already by giving one painting to two different grandchildren because she forgot she gave it to the first one. So that's the first fight that's going to happen in our family. This is Brigitte Duclos. It's 2:19. You're listening to 774 ABC Radio, and I'm talking to Rob Hand from Partners Wealth Group about the issues around inheritance. So, Rob, a question for you. What are the major mistakes people make when they write a will? I want to hear from anyone if they have any questions for Rob on inheritance, 1300 222 774, or any stories about it. But, yeah, what are the big mistakes people make?
I think the number one mistake is probably before you even start thinking that everything's really simple. If you've got other structures there, you've got businesses, all those different things, they all need different agreements. So a will is just one thing that you might need, and generally that's where people go. You obviously, even for if you are incapacitated, for example, that's a different set of documents and a different conversation you need to have around who might come in to make decisions for you on behalf of yourself from both financial and medical point of view. So that's where everyone becomes undone when they don't probably understand what you need to have in place to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a text here saying, surely these days inheritance is largely divided equally to the beneficiaries. Well, it's not always, is it?
Generally, you would think that would be the case, but it's not always. And what can happen is if you don't actually make that even, then that could open you up for challenges as well. So I've had conversations with clients before with obviously an estate planning lawyer there where somebody wants to give more to one son or daughter and there's not a real valid reason for that, and that can be a really big issue with challenges. So a lot of estate planning lawyers would actually say, look, they would have a conversation with the client and say, we might suggest you rethink that, and if you're going to do that through your will, otherwise you can leave other assets differently through trusts and other things that may even things up the way you want to even it up.
Yeah.
To fix that issue.
Okay. Tony wants to know on the text 0437 774 774. Can you please ask how you can get a copy of a will? Have you got a right to look at someone's will before they die?
Not necessarily, no. So you would need to ask the person that's made that will. If you're the executor on that will, I believe you can. But if you're a beneficiary, no, you can't.
You can't.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay. And you suggest the conversation with your mother or father. Let's sit down and talk about how you want to do this before they go.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in today's day and age, people are a little bit more open sometimes around that conversation. I think in the past, if I look at our family, that conversation was probably not had, and it was something that was frowned upon. These days, I think, as people are living longer, generally they're probably losing a little bit of capacity to deal with their money before they're actually passing away, where previously when maybe life expectancies were in the late 60s, your health might have been, I guess you might have finished up before you had that conversation or had those early signs.
Okay. Peter is on the line from Port Fairy. If you'd like to speak to Rob, 1300 222 774. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Brigitte. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, just wondering, we've already got a will in place, and what was happened, I've got 3 stepchildren, 2 of my own children, and we did have it in a like a percentage factor for different kids, but since then positions changed, and now we've got 1/5 for each child, and if one of the partners pass, the rest of the estate goes completely to that partner until that partner passes, and when there's none of us left, each child gets 1/5 share each. And is that as simple as it can get for us?
That is one way you can do it. Obviously, there are other iterations where you can actually have a testamentary trust, which is only formed upon your demise, and that testamentary trust can then have executors of that can help distribute each of those shares of those assets, for example, the 20% each, according to the beneficiary's situation. So I'll give you an example of that. If you had someone there that was going through a separation, or they had an addiction or something there that meant they were a vulnerable beneficiary, a testamentary trust being put in place would mean that for some of those parties, you'd be able to distribute the money straight through them. For others, you could sit the money in the testamentary trust, which is almost operates like a little bit of a roadblock. And then when that situation may unfold and may become less vulnerable, that money can then go through to that beneficiary. So that's an additional layer of protection you can put in place. It's something I advise a lot of my clients to do as part of their full estate plan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter, for your call. 1300 222 774 if you'd like to speak to Rob. A question here from Felicia. Can I please ask, my mum does not have a will and now has dementia, so can't do a will. I'm her only family, so does that mean I'll receive what little funds she has in the bank?
Generally that would be the case. Obviously, if you die without a will, then that can go to the state trustees and they deal with that. But generally, if you would be the primary beneficiary, that would be the case.
It is hard, though, if they've got dementia, the will won't count now, will it?
Well, if you were to do a new will, that won't count. If they had capacity when they made that will, then it certainly does. It will stay in place.
Okay. And this question, what happens if a family member won't hand over items? My sister has my mother's jewellery and refuses to divide it up, as was stated in the will.
That's a complicated one there. If the executor of the will has a legal obligation to adhere to what the will does put in place. So,
can you make them do that? Yeah.
I would say that you probably could via going through the court proceedings to do that. I don't know the exact process. Our internal legal team would normally deal with that.
And this anonymous text, hi Brigitte, I'm the eldest son of my father who is in his early 80s. My sister and I are worried about his second wife, my stepmother, who is 10 years younger than my dad. We're worried she'll take everything.
Yeah, I think with that one there, that would be a conversation early to understand what that looks like, and then making sure there's a robust estate plan put in place to protect the interest of the children, knowing that obviously there may be some provision for that the wife in there at some point in time as well. But that discussion needs to be had with the father. Okay,
Simon is on the line. Hi, Simon.
Yeah, hi, Brigitte. I was just curious as to what you can do if you've got a blended family. You've decided you're going to divide up the money between all the kids equally when both of you have died. You die early, she dies later. In the interim, surely she can just cut your kids out and tell them to go away. And I've seen it happen. So how do you protect your own kids?
Yeah, there's a type of will which is a contract to make mutual wills, which means that essentially you can deal with that so that no further changes to the will can occur in the future. So that's a way that generally a blended family would deal with that situation. So again, it's a little bit of a step up from a normal will, but certainly something that solicitors can draft up for you.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Simon, I cut you off there by mistake. What about elderly abuse? It's something we hear about where children can take advantage of elderly parents. How do you protect them from that? Yeah, not everyone's a happy family, you know. Yeah,
that's probably even a more complicated issue. We do see that, and certainly in our advice business, you've got to be very mindful of that when those elder clients, sometimes their children start to step in, and obviously we can only deal with them if they've got financial power of attorney. But there are some warning signs there whereby if you see large transfers of funds or anything else like that start happening soon after that power of attorney has been put in place, there are certain protections there by law for that, but it is something that unfortunately we do see quite a bit of.
Rob, something that's seems to be happening a lot now is elderly people transferring wealth earlier. They're not waiting till they die due to death tax or whatever the reason be. Is that something you're seeing more of as well?
It is certainly something we're seeing more of. And to go back to some of the comments we made before about that eldest daughter being that sort of next in line to get wealth, what we are seeing, particularly with the females taking on that wealth, is that they are looking to help provide for the family earlier rather than wait till later on. So whether that's provision for education, philanthropy, anything like that, they are looking at how they can help people in their family, particularly people want to get into the property market, those sort of things.
Yeah.
How do they do that earlier? So certainly there are lots of conversations around that in my client base. And it's certainly something I get a lot from those females that are taking on that active role.
Steve says, not married, no kids, want to leave everything to one niece, one nephew. Can the others contest the will? The other nieces and nephews, I gather he means.
Yeah, it's probably a probably too complicated question from me, given I'm not an estate planning lawyer. But
Yeah.
I would see a estate planning specialist and see if you can get some advice on that one.
Okay, it must be fascinating work, is it? I mean, it's a funny thing, and I have heard so many horror stories. You must see them too, Rob, I gather.
Well, I guess being an advisor, you're generally front and centre when there's an event that happens in somebody's life, whether it's a nice thing like someone's retiring. That's always a good thing. But we sort of get front and centre when someone's entering aged care or there's a death in the family. So you certainly see a lot of unique situations. And I guess my role is to understand what that is. I might not be the specialist in that all the time, but to be able to direct people where to go and be able to look out for those things there that we can take care of, just to get them back on track on the right way.
Okay, so just to finish on, Rob, in your opinion, the best way to broach the subject of death and inheritance with elderly family members?
Certainly have those conversations early with your family and include everybody. I think the worst thing you could do would be to exclude anybody in that. Propose that you sit down with an estate planning specialist, and I think the term solicitor or lawyer gets bandied around a bit. I think, and again, I'm being very generalist in this, you want to go to someone that specialises in this because it is a complex area. So if someone does a little bit of property law, a bit of commercial law, and then they also do some estate planning, if it's simple, sometimes they can handle it. As it gets more complex, you need to have someone that does that full time, in my view.
Okay.
And just keep that dialogue up in the family as you go along, because things will change, and certainly you don't want to be in a position where things have changed so much from when you put an estate plan in place that it really becomes a litigious sort of fight at the end. That's not what you want to do, and I think that comes about from just people not talking about it. Yep.
Good on you, Rob. Thank you for that advice. That is Rob Hand from Partners Wealth Group, all about inheritance and how to go about it. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Brigitte.